Okay, in this video we're starting to bring some things together. We have the angles and the ratios of special triangles, 30, 45, and 60-degree angles. We have reference angles. So now we're starting to extend what happens in the first quadrant of the circle to what happens in the other three quadrants. And you'll see when we do this, I'm just going to focus on the 30-degree angle as we go around the circle, but they work exactly the same for 45 degrees and 60 degrees if you worked around the circle. So I'm going to focus on 30 degrees, and then you can extend that to say, okay, the same thing would happen with 45 degrees if you went around the circle. The same thing would happen with 60 degrees as you go around the circle. In a previous video, you looked at, we kind of ended off here. We had these blank spaces, and in the first slide, the next board, I'm going to explain, we're going to fill in these circles. And then I'll summarize it all in the end to one complete table. So the sign of a 0, we don't know yet. But we've learned that the sine of 30 degrees, or pi over 6, is equal to 1/2. Cosine of 30 degrees, or pi over 6, is equal to square root of 3 over 2. And tangent is equal to square root of 3 over 3. And we've done that before. So sine is 1/2, square root of 2 over 2, square root of 3 over 2 as the angle increases. As the angle increases, notice that cosine decreases, square root of 3 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, 1/2. And tangent increases as you go across. So let's look at what happens at 0 and 90 degrees, or 0 and pi over 2 radians. All right, if you have a unit circle, or just any circle, centered at the origin with radius r, if this angle was down here, was all the way on the x-axis, then this radius would be this point. So the distance from here to here would be the radius of the circle, which is r0. So the coordinates here would be r0. If you rotated the angle up to here, then you would have an angle that is still r units in the y direction, but 0 units in the x direction. It's not anywhere this way. So this point, the coordinates this point are 0, r. If you remember, the sine of an angle is equal to the y value over the radius. Sine is equal to y over r. Cosine is equal to x over r. Tangent is equal to y over x. So the sine is equal to y over r. If for a 0 degree, I'm down here, the y value is 0, the radius is 0, so the sine of 0 is 0. And that's the same as the cosine of 90 degrees. The cosine of 90 degrees would be the x over r. X would be 0, and the radius was 1. So the cosine of 90 degrees is also 0. What about cosine of 0 degrees? Cosine of 0 degrees is equal to x over r. The r is the x. The radius is of the circle, so it's r over r, which is equal to 1. And that's also equal to the sine of 90 degrees. So we've kind of filled in those pieces for sine and cosine. So sine of 0 is 0, cosine of 90 is 0. Cosine of 0 is 1, sine of 90 is 1. Tangent of 0 is equal to y over x. So tangent of 0 is equal to the y value over the radius, 0 over r, and that's equal to 0. So the tangent of 0 degrees is equal to 0. Tangent of 90 degrees, that's equal to, that would be up here, is equal to r, which is the y coordinate, over 0, which is the x coordinate, and you can't divide by 0, so the tangent of 90 degrees is undefined. So as I said in the opening, I'm going to focus on the 30-degree angle. So we've got those for the special 0s and 90s. What happens when you take any angle in this quadrant and transfer it into the other three quadrants? So here's a 30-degree angle, roughly. Okay? 30 degrees, the cosine, if you have a unit circle is a circle with a radius of 1. Okay? So cosine is equal to the x value of 30. So cosine of 30 is equal to the square root of 3 over 2. Cosine is equal to the y value, which is 1/2. Sine of 30 is equal to 1/2. So this distance is square root of 3 over 2, about 0.866 units. This distance is a half a unit. It's a half a unit up the x-axis. So the coordinates of this point are square root of 3 over 2, 1/2. If I reflected that point over here, if I reflected that angle, the 30-degree angle from here, and I reflected it over to here, then the x value here becomes negative. The y value still stays positive. So the sine is equal to the y value. Sine of if this is 30 degrees, then this whole angle is 150 degrees. So the sine of 150 degrees is equal to the y value, which is 1/2. Cosine of 150 degrees is equal to the x value, which is equal to the negative square root of 3 over 2. So cosine is negative over here because you're on the left side of the quadrant. Tangent of 150 degrees, that's equal to the sine over the cosine, 1/2 divided by negative square root of 3 over 2, which is negative root 3 over 3. So this angle over here is the negative of the value in the first quadrant. What happens at 210 degrees? So I've had an angle here that was 30 degrees. I reflected it over to here to give me this angle. Now I'll reflect that angle down to get a 30-degree angle below the x-axis. And that's an angle in the third quadrant. You notice here that the cosine is still negative because I'm still to the left of the y-axis. And the sine is negative because I'm below the x-axis. So the sine of 210 degrees is the y-coordinate. It's y over 1, but in our case, we have a unit circle. So it's y, which is a negative 1/2. Cosine is equal to the x-coordinate, which is equal to negative square root of 3 over 2. Okay? And then the tangent will still be equal to the negative of this, or it's equal to this, divided by this, which will be square root of 3 over 3. It's the same ratio. I'm really focusing on the sine and the cosines here. The tangent is just the sine over the cosine. Alright? So that's what happens in the third quadrant. Notice that sine is negative and cosine is negative. But if you divide by a negative divided by a negative, the tangent will be a positive square root of 3 over 2. Keep rotating it. So we've reflected it over here. We've reflected it down. Now we're taking this one and reflecting it down here. So this would be 330 degrees. So this angle is 30 degrees. And that's our reference angle. This is the 30 degrees is the reference angle. So if you notice you're on the right side of the y-axis, so the x will be positive and the y will still be negative because you're still below the x-axis. So the coordinates of this point are square root of 3 over 2, negative 1/2. The sine of 330 degrees is equal to the negative y, so it's negative 1/2. Cosine of 330 degrees is equal to the square root of 3 over 2. It's positive. So if you notice here, sine is negative, cosine is positive. That negative and positive thing, what you notice is you have exactly the same ratios. 1/2 square root of 3 over 2 repeated around. The only difference between them was the sign of the value, the SIGN sign. So we have this little mnemonic to help you try to remember what ratios will be positive and what ratios will be negative. I'll explain it first and then I'll tell you what the mnemonic is. It's written there. In the first quadrant, if you're here, both x and y are positive. So the sine and the cosine will be positive here. And tangent will also be positive. So all the ratios are positive in this quadrant. When you go over here, now you're to the left of the y-axis, so x is negative, but you're above the above the x-axis, y is still positive. So over here, the sine will be positive, the cosine will be negative. And the tangent is the ratio, so if you have a positive divided by a negative, the tangent will also be negative. So the only value over here that's positive is the sine of the value, the sine of the angle. Down here in the third quadrant, down here you're below the x-axis, you're to the left of the y-axis, So both x and y are negative. So this means that the sine is negative, cosine is negative, and tangent is sine over cosine, this over this. So it'll be negative divided by negative. The tangent will be positive here. Over here, your x is greater than 0 because you're to the right of the y-axis. Your y is less than 0 because you're below the x-axis. So y is negative. Since y is negative, that means the sine is negative. X is positive, so that means cosine is positive. Tangent is the ratio of the sine over the cosine. So sine is negative, cosine is positive, so that makes tangent negative. So the ratio that's positive in the fourth quadrant is cosine. So to help you remember that, it's just something that might help a little bit. If you go counterclockwise, 1, 2, 3, 4, all are positive in the first quadrant. Sine, students, are in the second quadrant. Tangent is positive in the third. Cosine is positive in the fourth. So all students take calculus. All are positive, sine is positive, tangent is positive, cosine is positive. And all the other ratios will be negative. So that's just to help you. In the first quadrant, the values are just repeated around the circle, okay? But the only difference between them is the sign of each value. So I'd like to summarize that. So we have all the ratios in the first quadrant. All of these ratios repeat as you go around the circle. So we filled in these circles. The sine of 0 is 0, cosine of 0 is 1, tangent of 0 is 0. 0 over 1 is 0. So that fills in that. Now, if you remember, if you look, sine increases to 1. Cosine decreases to 0. So the sine increases, cosine decreases. Tangent increases. So you can think increase, decrease, increase to help you remember how those ratios are. You basically only need to memorize these or to learn these. And then what the tangent of the angles greater than 90 degrees, all of those are just positives or negatives by using all students take calculus to help you determine if the ratio will be positive or negative.